And welcome back to Morning Live. Now, major sports codes in South Africa will breathe a sigh of relief after President Cyril Ramaphosa announced that stadiums will be open for professional sports events at 50% capacity in the coming days. Now, South Africans who have vaccinated or who have recently tested negative for COVID-19 will now be able to attend sporting events in stadiums, music concerts and other social events. So to help us unpack what this means, we're joined by Stadium Management CEO Bertie Grobbelaar. Bertie, good to speak to you. Welcome to Morning Live.
Morning, Sakina. Always good to speak to you.
Bertie, let's start with just the impact of COVID and the restrictions that you've had to contend with for the past 2 years or so. So just paint a picture for us in terms of the sort of impact that it's had, not only on your finances, but management in general of these facilities.
Yes, a devastating effect. Last time we spoke, I said to you, and I think that was about a year back, that we're bleeding to death, and it really is the case. You referred to finances. That's one aspect of it. In terms of our management agreement with the City of Johannesburg, we maintain the 4 city entities, FNB, Rand, Dobsonville, and Orlando Stadium on a full financial risk basis. So the flip side of that coin is we're entitled to commercialize these venues in exchange for our obligation to maintain all of these venues. So you can just imagine the impact on this business model when there's no income generated by events.
So looking at last night's announcement by the president, a sigh of relief, but were you expecting more at this stage, Bertie?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and let's look at the glass half full this morning and not half empty. Definitely a very positive step in the right direction of opening up the venues to full capacity. I must say there's been an engagement with government and government stakeholders by various entities across the board over the last 12 months. What we do need to understand is the fact that, and I see there's a bit of confusion in the market out there. The announcement last night boils down and bears reference to the Disaster Management Act and those regulations. Parallel to this is the Minister of Health and the amendments he gazetted on the 15th of March, giving a 30-day period for stakeholders and interested parties to file recommendations to that proposed amendments. So we all know that the President announced that the Disaster Management Act is soon to be uplifted. So these new amendments to the Health Act is supposed to manage something like a pandemic.
So what does this mean for you on a practical basis as stadium management? So if you have a game, let's say on Saturday, and you are now allowed to have half of your capacity, how many people does that mean for a facility like FNB Stadium, for example, Bertie? And what does it mean in terms of your preparedness to host such an event?
So, the regulations state that you're entitled to 50% of your safe capacity, of your certificate, occupancy certificate. Now, our certificate allows for 87,000 spectators as a safe capacity, so half of that will be entitled to host at the venue. The regulations also clearly state that you need to display that certificate at the entry to your venue. What does it mean for stadium management as an entity? Are we ready to host events? Yes, we are. Although we don't know the full extent of the logistics, that we'll need to iron out today with various stakeholders in the industry. But we will be ready to do so. But there is practical questions that needs to be answered. One also needs to bear in mind that, take, for example, football in South Africa. It's not for the clubs to decide on their own accord. We're going to, for example, Kaizer Chiefs with their host venue at FNB Orlando Pirates at Orlando Stadium and Swallows at Dobsonville. It's not for them to decide unilaterally we're going to host a fixture on Saturday. They've got a governing body that will issue directives as well, that they are bound to, and us as the host venues obviously will be bound to that regulations as well. What that would be, I don't know. So we're waiting for the clubs and the PSL to guide us on that matter.
So just looking at your preparedness from a resource perspective, Bertie. So now not only the marshals and all the other ticketing equipment and things that you needed previously, you also then had to get the scanners to take people's temperature. So let's talk through that process. How is this going to work? Because now people have to produce vaccine certificates, failing which they need to provide proof of a negative PCR test. Are you prepared for all of this, and how are you going to work all of this out?
We will be prepared for that. The question is, it's an additional layer of security. It's an additional layer of checking compliance to regulations. The cost impact of that is the issue. So we've got some of the equipment, not all of it for 45,000 capacity, but it's easy to get that. It's easy to train and deploy security guards and marshals to marshal that aspect. The question is, who's responsible for those costs? The further question is, as I read the regulations at the moment, it states the production of vaccine certificate, alternatively a negative COVID result. As I read the regulations now, it states a visual proof and not, for example, a scanning directly to the National Department of Health database.
So that means that you are then constrained in how much you can do in any regard, because how are you going to know that someone is producing a fraudulent test result to you, for example?
That is some of the logistical aspects you referred to a minute or two ago that we will need to iron out with government, with the governing bodies. I know, for example, at overseas events, currently you produce your certificate, it's checked against your ID, and there's no direct requirement to verify that against a government database. So what that will entail, hopefully we'll find out during the course of the day.
And then also the issue of mask wearing. So if you're outdoors, on the outside, not required. What happens in your suites, Bertie? Are people expected to wear masks in those facilities? And also with regard to social distancing, how are you going to manage that?
And you're asking relevant but difficult questions this morning. Yes, the inside the suites, definitely there will be a requirement to wear your mask in terms of the regulations. If you're outside on the stand area of the suites, I see it in terms of my interpretation that it's good not to wear a mask. But the social distancing, this will entail at our venue at least 2 seats open between each and every spectator. Now you need to deal with families attending. Are you going to allow for groups of families to sit together and then allow for social distancing between them? In terms of the regulations, as I read and interpret it, it requires a meter between individuals. So again, that will require the deployment of additional marshals to oversee that aspect and to marshal that.
So, Bertie, just a final question. I think this weekend is international weekend, but so you at least have this breather. But what happens after this? How soon after this are you prepared to accept the numbers back? And also, What are you going to do when people come at you en masse and, you don't have necessarily the time to go through those certificates and with any sort of real veracity being established? What happens in that instance? Because we know how people behave at stadiums. If you go there, sometimes they get impatient and they just storm.
No, definitely the SASHRA Act, the Safety at Sports and Recreational Events Act, still applies. And there is an Event Safety and Security Planning Committee that directs the planning and approves planning for events. So I'm not concerned that we'll be able to manage that in accordance with the approved planning from the ESSPC. We've managed previous events, derbies, where more than the amount of tickets sold as spectators arrive. So I'm not concerned about that. To clarify the specific rules that needs to be implemented, that's point number one. The second point is to clarify the cost involved in this, because somebody has to fit the bill. Luckily, I see that the Titans announced that there's spectators today. There's additional 3,000 tickets available. So I'll be going to Supersport Park this afternoon to see their first attempt at allowing back spectators.
Well, we're all looking forward to this, but I think everybody happy that at least more people will be allowed into the facilities. Bertie, we'll talk at a later stage, no doubt. I'm sure some of the vendors also happy to get back and, how that program will also roll out. But thanks so much for your time this morning. And that was Bertie Grobbelaar, who's the CEO of Stadium Management South Africa.